Hello everyone, and welcome to our Senior Leader Series. Today, we're doing something completely different. We're doing a Senior Leader panel. I have three distinguished members of the Senior Executive Service with me today. I have Ms. Diane Randon. She's the senior official performing the duties of the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Army for Manpower and Reserve Affairs. Mr. Bill Moore, he's the Assistant Deputy Chief of Staff, Army G4, and Mr. Roy Wallace, he's the Assistant Deputy Chief of Staff for Army G1. Ms. Randon, thank you very much for being here, Mr. Moore, Mr. Wallace. Really appreciate it. So what I wanted to ask the three of you, you're all senior executives. Did you all start out wanting to be senior executives, and when did that kind of plan to be an SES come to fruition? Ms. Randon?
Well, I know in my own situation, I had never aspired to be a senior executive. I actually didn't really have an idea in my mind about what rank I wanted to achieve. I don't know, for me, I know at one point I thought if I achieved a GS-12 budget officer rank that I had arrived. But you know, had really great mentors, worked up the ranks, and I was actually asked to apply for my very first senior executive position, and I actually was selected for the position. And so that's really what happened to me.
Yeah. Mr. Morris, we talked earlier, and I know something similar happened with you.
It was similar because I came in, I think, like Diane, at a very low grade, GS5. Actually, I was a mechanical engineer fresh out of college, and had no aspirations for being a senior executive. I'm not even sure I knew what one was back then, and I certainly hadn't met one, nor had I met a general officer. But years later, as I worked my way through a fairly bumpy career, I was trying to make my goal, which was GS-15, and I decided I needed to get through senior service college to do that, just to be more competitive. And about the time, and it took me 3 different tries actually to get approved to go to senior service college.
I thought you were going to say to pass senior service college.
I actually passed the first time I went.
Very good.
But right before I was actually selected for senior service college, I was selected for a GS-15 job. And I was like, man, I have made my career goal. Life is grand. I'm not going to take the time to go to senior service college. And like Diane, again, I had mentors that looked at me and said, look, we have spent 3 long, hard years to get you to senior service college. You need to still go. We think you may have potential to be a senior executive. And that was the first moment it ever crossed my mind. And I sort of dismissed it, frankly. But that year at senior service college is where it sort of built my confidence to say, hey, you know, maybe I could actually make it to that level. And so that was sort of my path. And eventually I was able to compete and get hired on as an SCS.
Mr. Wallace, when did it kind of come into your thing?
As Sesame Street taught us, one of these things is not like the others. I spent 27 years in the military and rose to the grade of colonel. And as I was getting ready to retire, I suddenly realized that I hadn't done everything that I really thought that I wanted or needed to do. And I saw the senior executive service as a path to get those things done, to rise to the level to where you can actually accomplish something for, not just for yourself, but for the rest of the United States Army. And that's when I decided to apply. Of course, I had a mean old Mark Lewis that was writing me, making me write my ACQs, making me do everything the way it needed to be done to get through the process. And at that point, that became the goal. And I never wanted to go any higher than that. And those other opportunities came along through senior mentorship, as both Diane and Bill said, and have pushed me to go higher.
And so it's funny that you mentioned the mentorship, because all three of you kind of touched on that a little bit, which leads me exactly right into my next question. So what's the best advice you guys have received in your career? Mr. Wallace?
Oh, I don't think I can say it on camera. No, the best advice is to remain flexible and to remain focused on your goals and where you need to go. To use all of the experiences that you had from the past to drive you forward towards those goals. I think that's probably the best advice I ever received, and probably the best advice I could give another person.
Mr. Moore?
Are you talking the best advice we followed or the best advice we got?
I don't know by what you followed.
Okay, because there was a lot of great advice I got that I wasn't smart enough at the time to follow. But in reflection, which is an important bit of advice I got in my earlier career days, is the need to reflect on where you are and where you're trying to go. Probably the most important advice I got was to, and it was very early in my career, was one of my bosses was saying, hey, you need to observe how others act and learn from that and apply that in what you do day to day. And as I dug into that, it's really an observation of both best practice or good behaviors and bad behaviors. So as I was aspiring to be a leader, it's like, so what do I like about a good leader? And what are about those leaders that I didn't like? And I never want to be like them. And then, reflecting upon that and adjusting my own behavior to sort of fall into that based on those observations. And that was some really great advice. And then just one last point, as I reached the SCS level, I didn't realize how that sort of puts you in a glass house to a degree. And I was about a month into the job as a senior executive, and I was walking into work with our chief of staff, who was a colonel, and she was actually a mentor of mine, because my mentors are, rank has nothing to do with mentorship, in my opinion. You can be mentored by anyone when the time is right. But she was like, hey, sir, how you doing? I was like, oh, I'm hanging in there. And she said, sir, she stopped. And I'm like, come on, let's go. She goes, sir, you can never be hanging in there. You are the top civilian on this entire base now. You have got to be, I'm doing great. I'm on the top of my game. Life is good. She goes, you can never, if you're hanging in there, what do you think the rest of the workforce is doing? So that was, that in itself really changed my whole approach to being a senior executive, because it is a little different. You are kind of under a microscope a bit at all times, which is okay, but you just have to live up to the expectations.
Do you find that kind of the same thing, Ms. Randon?
I was just going to say that Bill and I must have had the same mentor. But so working backwards.
You took more advice, though. You followed more advice than needed, right?
I was an early adopter. So.
Right.
So I had a mentor when I became a senior executive, and he was a former boss of mine, and he said, if you never felt like anyone was watching you, everyone's watching you all the time as a senior executive. And I think that was really important to say, because it really meant that, you're a leader and you are role modeling behavior. And so showing up at a meeting, showing up with your workforce, showing up in the hallway, conduct is 24 hours. And so it's really important about how you show up, because everyone will be watching you, to model you, to, it's about our position. And so people will try to take advantage of a weakness or anything else. And so I thought that was really important. I've never forgotten that. But maybe a little bit earlier in my career, I had another great mentor and former boss. And, she, kind of in the same vein, she said, all of your accumulated performance and conduct, create your reputation, and you control that, and first impressions matter. And so that was just really helpful, because, I'd like to think I have a strong work ethic from my parents, but it really does kind of set the conditions that we have a contract, we're at work, we have a responsibility to perform, we have a responsibility for our conduct, and we sure hold ourselves accountable first before we can ever hold anyone else accountable. So it was great advice.
Yeah. So, and to add on that same vein, some of the best advice I ever got was to never lose your humility. Because when you lose that, you start believing the things that people tell you, and you start acting in ways that you wouldn't normally. So those are the kind of things, again, like Bill said, we're all in glass houses, and if we keep the right perspective on things and watch what we do and how we do it, then we set that example for the next generation that's coming forward.
Here, here.
So as we're talking about careers and mentors and kind of that growth path for all three of you to become senior executives, if you look back 30 years ago, what were the things that surprised you? When you look from 30 years ago up until this point, what's kind of surprised you and stood out?
Oh, goodness. Let's see, 30 years ago, I was an executive officer for then Colonel Promotable Ted Stroop. I was at TRADOC headquarters, and I learned that no matter how high you go, you can still become a second lieutenant again. Because he was getting ready to move from headquarters TRADOC to the engineer district in New York City. And in mid-stride, I had already gotten his household goods packed. I'd already moved him. The truck was en route, and they changed his orders and moved him to Washington, D.C. to be the PA&E. So we had to chase down a truck and get the goods from Governor's Island in New York City and get them down here. Again, that kind of goes back to humility, the humility piece of this thing, because you really don't understand what it really means to be a senior executive until you hit one of those types of things and events in your life. So you can, the thing that surprised me is that even people at those really high levels have someone they have to answer to. You're never your own boss, especially in the federal government. We all have someone except maybe the president, and even he has to listen to the Supreme Court and the Congress. But you always have somebody that you are kind of beholding to or you need as you're going forward. So I think that kind of surprised me, because I thought these generals and these SESs were omnipotent. They had powers beyond belief and so on and so forth. And I think that was an eye-opening thing, to be kind of like an aide-de-camp to one of those senior individuals.
So I want to switch gears a little bit, and all three of you are exceptionally busy people. And you expel a lot of energy, throughout your courses of your day. And outside of the Army performance triad, fitness, nutrition, and sleep, what are some of the ways that you guys restore energy so that you can come to work every day and you can not just be just hanging in there? How do you do it?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't go any further than, at least initially, the three legs of between nutrition, sleep, and exercise are critically important, and you really have to make sure you find the time for that. And I actually, after I became an SES, I quit working out. I had a pretty disciplined regimen in most of my life up until that point, but I felt like I was too busy, and I couldn't get there. And it was probably 2 or 3 years of that, and I could just feel my body sort of slipping away. And my doctor said, "You are skipping the most important meeting of your day, and that's you in the gym." And so I found a way to kick that back in, and I've continued to do that throughout my close to 10 years now at the senior executive level. And so that is important. But beyond that, I mean, I do some amount of reading, touch base with the kids. I've got 3 children, so connecting with them is helpful. The fact of just doing some reflection, and you can do that just about anywhere at any time, and that level of appreciation, the sunrise you see coming into the Pentagon, the moonrise you see leaving the Pentagon. I mean, you just got to appreciate, or the fact that someone has brought you, right, great.
But it's all tinted yellow.
That's true. Or someone brings you a great product, or you see someone you're mentoring actually make the next level. I mean, you got to take that in, and that is like a power boost. I mean, it's like drinking the 5-hour energy to me. When you see something like that, and you got to really take a deep breath and enjoy that moment, and that will help you replenish your batteries as well. And then there's always Facebook.
Right, but just not at work.
Find out what the rest of the world is doing.
Just not at work.
Not at work. That's
Correct.
Right. Late at night,
Ms. Randon, what do you do to replenish your energy?
Well, so first of all, the performance triad is brilliant because those three legs of the stool are absolutely critical. And, you know, so I've always tried to stay active. In fact, one thing about a Department of Army civilian is when I came in as a GS4 and then a GS5, and I was married to a military guy at the time, and I thought, I want to be able to pass the PT test. Like, I feel like I just should. As a Department of Army civilian, I'm around troops, and so that got me energized to want to be fit. And you know, so I've always run the 10-miler, Army 10-miler, other races, but I didn't run my first half marathon until I was 50. So no one should slow down being healthy as a result of being an executive. But the other thing about that is stay grounded to remembering what makes you up. So for me, I'm very social. I love my friends, even off Facebook. So trying to connect with my,
I know,
like for real, like it's not virtual.
I thought they were just on
yeah,
virtual.
No, I like everyone, and but connecting with my friends, connecting with my family, engaging in my hobbies, volunteering, reflecting. Reflecting is so important because it helps you remember what's important, and at the end of the day, it should not be your inbox. I mean, we are professionals and we have work to do, but we have another component of our life that's going to long last however long we work.
Yeah. And to go along those same lines, I know it frustrates the people in the G1, but when I leave here on Friday afternoon, I unplug. If they want to call, if they want me, they can call me and tell me, hey, go read this email that's sitting out there in your inbox. You have to find some time, and utilization of your time is important too. I mean, hooking with family, and when I do that, on the drive home. Mm-hmm. Through my car, dial my dad up, talk to him. Dial my sister up, talk to her. You know, and before my in-laws passed, dial them and talk to them on the way home. Time management is extremely important for senior executives on trying to get things done. Going back to advice, I had one person that told me something that I've tried to stick to all my life. Says, what time does the meeting start? The meeting starts at the appropriate time. It doesn't start 30 minutes late. You don't waste other people's time by having them sit around for hours and hours and hours. And that's consideration of others. And no matter what grade you are, that's important.
So I want to switch gears. We've talked about the past, we've talked about the present, and I want to talk a little bit about the future. So, in your guys' mind, as we look forward 10 years, what skills will the leaders of tomorrow need within the Army and the Army civilian service?
I guess I can start on that one. You know, some skills are enduring as a leader. I'm a big believer in character, commitment, and competence is what really makes up the fiber of a leader. And by far the most important is character. And in this day and age with social media and networking and all that that's out there, I mean, you know, even if you make a mistake, it's going to be public. Where I think back when we were kind of growing up, you could make a mistake and it wouldn't be on videotape. It wouldn't be out there for people to see and to criticize. But now, I mean, it just makes character even more important. And you know, back to being in a glass house, it's almost like it doesn't matter what rank you are anymore. You're in a glass house, and I think that's going to carry on. So, establishing your character is really critical. And then, you know, the commitment piece. I mean, I'll take a committed employee over a competent employee any day of the week, because I know that if that person is committed, they'll figure out what skill set they need to accomplish the mission, and they'll get there. And you know, trying to generate that commitment from the workforce is a real challenge these days. We spend a lot of time on competence. You know, we create classes, we send them off to other jobs, et cetera, but creating commitment, that's going to be, that's always been a challenge that I enjoy trying to take on and trying to find that spark. You know, I had one boss used to say, hey, find what takes someone's eyes off the clock for the clock watchers and put them to work on it. Even if it's not our mission, I just want them doing something productive for the Army. So it's like, what takes their eyes off off the clock, and trying to match personal interest with organizational goals is a real secret to success in leadership. But 10 years out, agility and flexibility, I mean, things are just going to keep getting faster in terms of technology and how that technology comes to market, or how threats come to bear. All that's going to be moving at a pace that I don't think we're ready for, but we need to be. And so, I see those characteristics changing over time.
Yeah, as Bill said, though, there are a couple things that we're going to have to guard against 10 years from now. And that's what I call kind of socialization of the workforce and the leadership. I do a lot of leadership of walking around. I show up in cubicles all across the G1 and other places across the Army staff.
I know you showed up. You showed up to my cubicle a couple times, and it is rather surprising when you show up.
So, but that is a piece of leadership that I think we can't lose 10 years from now, and that's the visibility of the leader. You can't just sit at your computer and send emails all day long and taskers by TMT and whatever other system may be in vogue 10 years from now. One of the things I think we're going to have to guard against is losing that personal touch from leadership, because I think that's what drives. Even today's thumb generation is driven by personal touch. So I think that's something that we have to continue.
I always enjoy it, though, when you pop around to my cubicle, sir. Ms. Randon?
I just have probably one thing to add, because it's pretty much ditto, and maybe just expounding on what Bill and Roy both said about, kind of the enduring skill that you need in relating to people is also, knowing your people enough to know how to connect with them. And it is generational, and it is, based on, what they like with regards to, their behaviors. And that personal touch is always going to be important, and 10 years from now. And Bill touched about all, agility and flexibility and innovation, sure. But at the end of the day, it comes back to the people.
Well, I would like to thank all three of you for coming down and connecting with the audience. I know that they're going to get a lot of great information about Army civilians across the globe. So, Ms. Randon, Mr. Moore, Mr. Wallace, thank you so much, and I really appreciate you all coming here and having this dialogue. Thank you.
Happy to.
Our pleasure.
Yeah. Thanks.